All right, guys. Hey, happy Friday. Today is January 29th, and you're hanging out with my community manager, the community built by, for, and managed by community managers. As always, you can hang out with us over on Twitter at hashtag CMGR Hangout, where I know a bunch of you are right now. So, hey, what's up, guys? What's up, Michael? I see you just popped up in there, so happy Friday. If you love what you're seeing, or maybe you have an idea for a future topic or want to hang out with us, please head over to our website at mycmgr.com. Click on Participate. There you can fill out a form and really just let us know what's up. We'll get back to you. It's really you guys, it's your topics that keep this community running. Sherry and I just help facilitate. So, all right, what do we have for you today? Well, we all know community feedback is crucial to, well, everything. And but what exactly does that feedback loop look like? Well, we're going to find out today. First, let's just let everyone introduce themselves. Sherry?
Hey everybody, I'm Sherry Rohde. I'm the community manager at Magento and co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Brew.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah. I am the Director of Community and Support at TicketLeap, and I've been a community manager for over a decade now.
Hey everybody, I'm Laura Lopez. I'm the community manager for an event technology firm called Social Tables. I've been a community manager for about 5 years.
Hey everyone, I'm Laura. I'm the community manager at Crowd Content. I manage marketing and community there, and I've been in the community space for about 2 years now.
Oh, Jen, you got to unmute yourself. Let's grab other Jen for a minute.
Hi guys, I'm other Jen, also known as Jen Chen. Sorry, my lower third isn't working today, but Twitter handle is Jen to the Chen. I'm currently the community manager at Lithium Technologies, and I have been a community manager for maybe 3 to 4 years now.
Hey, I'm Jen, and I think I'm unmuted now. So I am a community manager at Health Union, and I'm really excited to be here. Also, my lower third isn't working. I'm at Jen Lebowitz on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, for those of you just tuning in, earlier this week was CMAD, Community Manager Appreciation Day, and our first question is, what was your favorite part of CMAD? So, I'd love to just hear, kind of out of that day, what your favorite part was.
I think it was neat that just seeing community managers from all over the world come together for this day. I know community means such different things to different brands, but to see everyone come together was really neat, and props to you guys for putting that on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And kind of working off that, I would definitely say that just bringing more awareness to community as a discipline is huge. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and community managers are few and far between. Some people have community-related duties, but they may not be a community manager. So just bringing about that awareness that community does not equal social media management, and helping people understand what it is that we do on a day-to-day basis and how we work cross-functionally across all departments. And then typically, community managers, sometimes there's only 1 or 2 or very small group per company. So again, it's a great way to kind of band together. So that was probably my favorite part.
I think my favorite part, actually I'm going to cheat and do 2 really quick, but one was seeing Sherry's report after CMAD on all the different stats and all the different events that were happening. I thought that was really neat in terms of just looking at who attended, activity throughout the world. There's stuff happening in the US and Europe and Japan, so that was really cool. And then secondly, there was a moment like right before I started my hangout on Monday where I got to see like Brew and the rest of the CMAD team just behind the scenes, and I think they were actually like wrapping up a panel at the time. So that was kind of neat, just being able to see them in that kind of environment, like really pushing things along. And it was at the end of the day, so it was really cool to see how they're trying to push through still.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to be connecting with people on Twitter through learning about them in the Hangouts. So after CMAT, I now feel like I'm so much more part of the community. So yeah.
Do we all have to answer this one? Because I didn't really get to do anything on Monday, so I'm a bit of a fail there. But I did really enjoy seeing like even all the nominees for the different awards. It was just like nice to see so many names out there attached to community manager roles. That always feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we said a couple times that day, but we had over 300 nominations, and for us that was huge, just because we've seen this thing grow. It almost felt like not that this year was necessarily a tipping point, but there are so many new faces and people who we hadn't seen in the past, and so it's just really cool for me to see the community of community growing, right? And bonding together, because I think even in community, there's all kinds of sub-communities of community managers, and seeing everyone come together and work together for that one day to celebrate was just a really cool moment.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with a mixture of you guys. For me, it was all of the new faces. It was really exciting to have a year where I actually didn't know most of the panelists going in. For me, that was a big deal. And then also just the diversity of the different countries. We had 17 different countries involved in the panels alone, and that's not even including people who participated on Twitter or sharing their story or whatnot. But on that note, thanks to Laura Doan for sharing your story and Jen for organizing a panel.
So let's roll us into question number 2, which is, how do you make it easy for anyone to submit feedback within your community?
I would say, make it a process. There's a lot of things going on, and especially like a community manager's role, and I think it's easy to get involved in a lot of different things without, with just jumping in. And I learned, especially as a community manager, to start those processes for every project that you do. So for submitting feedback, make it a process so that when customers or community users submit feedback, they know the process and they know how to do it, and they know that their feedback is going to be looked at and valued versus just disappearing in the black hole that's the internet.
I totally, oh, sorry, were you going to go, Sarah?
Go for it.
Okay, totally agree with that. And I also think for us, part of it is moderating a lot. So being like deeply entrenched in the moderation and meeting people where they're at is a big way that we get and respond to feedback, because of course, while we have the standard email address on our site, like contact us, being where people are and just answering, like if they give us feedback in a comment on a Facebook post or in the visitor post or a message, which they do, from all angles, I think being there and meeting people where they're at is really helpful.
Yeah, I was going to add, just keep asking for it as well. You can't rely on people having such a great experience or such a negative experience or whatever their feedback is to take it on themselves to tell you. So if you're constantly asking for it, you'll get more of it back.
And I would say along those lines is don't ask for feedback only when you get negative feedback. Don't have that be the trigger. Just always be asking for feedback. Constantly, positive or negative, and then sort of like what Jen was saying is that, make sure that people know where that feedback is going. It is very easy to put it down, maybe you get an email, you log it somewhere, and then just nothing happens to it. So making sure that all the teams are involved. So if you have maybe product testers and you're gleaning feedback from them, make sure that you're always, engaging with them, and so they know that they can continue to give feedback. So making sure that it's sort of this constant loop, not just, hey, we need your feedback that one time.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you mentioned, asking for it is just so important. We actually do regular email surveys using Google Forms, just so A, we can collect the data, and B, people know that their opinion counts, like they're going directly into the development and the next phase of our community. So just keeping that line of communication open, I think, is vital there.
So during this feedback cycle, how do you make sure your community feels value when they're contributing that feedback?
Nobody wants to answer this one. One of the ways that we try and make sure they know is even on our Net Promoter Score emails, it says right there, our CEO reads every single reply we get to this. And that, since we've added that, the number of responses that we get has like increased dramatically. So even just like letting them know ahead of time, someone's gonna look at it, and you might not see like a feature request or something like implemented the next day or the next week, but we are taking it into consideration. The other thing we do is whether it's negative, positive, we try and send people things. So even if it's just a handwritten note, sometimes we'll send them larger gifts if, you know, they feel like we've totally messed up their lives or something. We'll be like, take some coffee and cookies. But just like responding to them as a human, because they are human, really works as well.
I think the thing is too, when you respond, make it personal. It's easy to be like, thanks for your feedback, great idea, thanks for your feedback, great idea, but then people will know that you're doing that, and after a while it just sounds kind of robotic and impersonal. So like first, don't use an automated response. You know, really take the time to listen to your community users' feedback. And I think one thing that helped for me a lot was helping them understand what the reasoning is behind that feedback. If they want a certain feature or if something's not working the way that they want it, really try to get in their heads and be able to understand their perspective. I think that'll help you as a community manager, and then it'll help the community member who's providing the feedback feel validated in that you're taking that time to understand them.
For us at Social Tables, it's a little bit of, you know, tit for tat. So if we have a really, really big champion at a really well-known company and, you know, their feedback obviously is valued and they're a long-term customer, you know, we're always in the business to make them famous also. So can we do a really big case study for them that puts their brand at the forefront of really, really big pieces of content? So, you know, their feedback is technically free. We're not paying them to do that. But us creating content for them or just giving back to them in some way that is valuable for them is something that we're all about also. So it doesn't even necessarily need to be something, you know, physical. It could be just, I mean, I guess content's kind of physical, but it could be just, you know, figuring out what they value. And if it's brand awareness or, you know, cookies, coffee, I love cookies, you know, that's a way that you could just figure out what do they value and give that back to them.
Well, I love cookies too. I don't think anyone can argue with cookies and coffee. So moving on to question number 4 is like, is all feedback equal? And if not, how do you extract expert knowledge from general comments?
I would say definitely not. There's people who, you know, submit features that aren't doable unless, you know, you're Harry Potter and you have a magic wand, to be completely honest. Or there's, you know, people who submit feedback and it's kind of out of the realm of what you'd be able to do. So I would say that not all community user feedback is at the same level of usefulness, but then one thing that you can do, like I said, kind of referenced earlier, was getting in the mind of a community user and understanding where they're coming from. And so sometimes the solution that you can provide is not necessarily the one they want, but one that will still meet their needs. And another thing for us, like a way that I take a look and kind of leverage community feedback and look at those experts is I have a team of super users. They're people who are really down there in the trenches every day using certain feature. They know the feature inside and out. And because of that, they are the people that I go to for feedback. So part of their, one benefit of being a super user is that they get to meet with the product team and provide that honest feedback for them. So that kind of feedback is something that we take into account a lot.
I would agree with Jen there. There's always going to be outliers, and some of their feedback will sound completely absurd, but it means something to them, right? So it's important that you at least try to find a middle ground, and but it is also important to go with the common denominator and not get too distracted by extreme ideas or complaints or praises even.
I agree. For us, this might be context specific, but because a lot of our community members have different health conditions, we like things that are affecting that health condition, we try to implement immediately. So for example, some feedback we got was that the colors were too bright on our site, migraine.com, so we were able to change the background so it wasn't a bright white anymore. But maybe that applies to other communities in the way that, like, you go for the big wins or something that's really affecting your community members in a big way might be something that's extra valuable feedback.
I think too, if you can understand their actual problem, sometimes they are giving you a solution that is not an ideal solution or maybe not possible for you. But if you can understand their actual problem behind that, there may be a creative other route to take. For example, we recently changed our download path for our software to where they have to log in and download it. The reason being so that if there's a security reason or something that we need to notify by actual release version, we can do that. But one of the pain points is there were just so many manual steps to go through to get to that download version on the archive page. So what we did was implement actual anchor tags on the download page so that we can send them in our instructions directly to that link, and it eliminates 5 steps for them. So while it wasn't exactly what they asked for, it helped remove some of those pain points along the way.
I love that point so much, and it reminds me of that incredibly made up quote by Henry Ford that he definitely did not say is if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, and really getting to the root cause of people's feedback. So if they're telling you, hey, we really want this feature to work this way, or why doesn't this do this, you have to keep asking why to really get to okay, how can we really help this person? The other point I wanted to make about, is all feedback as valuable as other feedback is to the person with the complaint. Everybody is the hero in their own story, so it is very important to them. So while you might be that is the craziest thing I've ever heard, and we are never doing that, you still have to, say okay, I get why this is important to you. I'm listening to you, and I understand. And even if it's here's why we can't do that, it's still valuable.
So what happens when you have a strategy and probably something that you've worked hard to build, but the feedback you're getting doesn't necessarily line up? Where do you find that balance with feedback as it relates to strategy?
I think touching on what a couple people have said already, I think it goes into transparency as much as you can. So one thing that Lithium has is something called an idea exchange, and this is a separate part of our community where you can submit ideas, which are basically feedback or product feature requests. And one thing that we try to do is we have the statuses for ideas. So it might be something like new, under consideration, delivered, accepted, things like that, and that provides our users with the opportunity to see, where is that idea in the process? Is it something that's not on the roadmap? And I think, one benefit that we have is that most users understand roadmap because they're, dealing with that same issue in their communities. So, for example, I was actually a Lithium community user managing a separate community run by Lithium. And I remember sitting down with a product manager, and he, told me, hey, this is a really great idea, but it's not in our roadmap right now, at the moment. And even just hearing that from him actually gave me a sense of assurance, like, okay, they looked at my feedback, they considered it, but it's not something that they can do right now, and completely understood that.
I think with, oh, oops, is my sound okay? I'm hearing an echo. Okay, cool. And I completely agree. I think managing the expectation on part of the person giving the feedback will help you balance both your internal strategy, your own goals for community, and then also still getting that feedback loop is telling somebody, really plainly, like, that is a great idea. Here's what we're really trying to launch, and just telling somebody this is what we're doing. It sort of brings people into the fold because they almost feel like they're getting insider information about your product or about where your company is going. And usually that, not to say that's really like a bait and switch, but just saying, hey, you know what? We love the feedback. We hear you. We think it's an awesome idea. This is what we're concentrating on right now. That's on the map eventually. And then telling them, this is where we're at and this is why, and giving them that justification. Usually that helps to kind of at least strike somewhat of a balance between, that's a terrible idea, we're never doing that, and here's what we're doing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And just going back to what Jen said earlier, I think people who are in the trenches and using community on a daily basis, those are the ones who are going to impact strategy more than someone who's, say, just popping in. What we've done at Crowd Content is that we actually do focus groups sometimes. So we'll do a Slack channel and sort of let those heavy users in on that focus group, and then they'll have more of an impact on the internal strategy than, say, a new user or someone who just pops in every now and again.
I would say the other side of that as well is if you're only relying on feedback from your heavy users, you can start getting your product or community too narrowed in on those people that can only do it really well. So if your next quarter you're tasked with user acquisition, or your product, you're trying to figure out how to get more users, you don't want to take that feedback. And I remember listening to Katerina Fake a really long time ago talk about Flickr, and they would implement features for their power users, and then everybody else would say, like, we don't know what to do. We were just trying to store photos of our grandkids on Flickr. What are you doing to us? So it does obviously depend on what your strategy is going forward, but yeah, you can take both into consideration.
So rolling into our next question, it's how do you balance community feedback? No, that's the one we just did. So number 6 is how often do you implement changes or iterations from feedback? So is it something that's happening daily, weekly, cycles? I don't know.
For us, we basically try to do it as much as possible. Again, because mostly the kind of feedback that we get is stuff like, that affects the person's condition. So when we had a certain type of slideshow on our sites, and people with rheumatoid arthritis, it was hard for them to click through it. So that we took that to our UX team immediately and spoke with the larger team, and were able to implement a new form of slideshow. And I think what Jen said before, having a process really facilitates that.
I think for us, we implement a lot of feedback that we get in the releases that we have. So that's about every month, and that is really, really helpful feedback that we then use to make features or products better. And then I think one thing to consider too when you look at any feedback is how easy is it to implement. There's things that you can change right away in 5 minutes, and then there's things that you'll have to go to product to, or to your manager, or to people within the company to get buy-in and to get some work done. And for the 5-minute kind of changes, those are implementations that you can make that will really win over some community users. Obviously, I wouldn't say take a look at all those 5-minute changes and do everything right away, because some of those, again, you might not agree with, but some of those actually will be really useful, and a lot of that is really good feedback. So just as an example, I held a hangout on my community this week, and one comment that someone made was, hey, like, could you provide a calendar invite on this, like a downloadable .ics file? And that was super easy. I just Googled how do you do this and made that, provided it on the community, and then replied to that person's comment, kudoing them and thanking them for their feedback. So I think it's really important to remember and kind of start bucketing things in terms of how quickly can you implement that feedback.
I'm going to bring in a quick question here from Michael over on Twitter, so we have a little time. And Sherry, I think you're probably best to answer this. Michael asks, what has been the ratio between feedback and insights given to you after CMAD?
Yeah, I replied to him on Twitter, actually. I guess someone would define the difference between feedback and insights. Maybe my brain isn't quite up to par today. Because my thought would be that insights is more like unpacking the data around it, whereas feedback is more like, hey, this was great, or hey, there's room for improvement here. And mostly, I wouldn't even, I guess, feedback, but more so even just reflections. And I don't know that they really fall under either of those two buckets, but it's just people talking about different parts of the day. We did get some feedback from Sphinx that it went a lot smoother in perception. I say perception because, trust me, than past years. And so that was really good to hear, that it came across really well. But we do use that feedback actually every year to improve CMAT going forwards. I remember last year actually when we did the awards, Patrick O'Keefe reached out and was like, hey, can you share like the reasons that people were nominated on the winners page, because I know I, for one, would be really happy to share why I nominated that person, and it would make the award that much more special to them to know why they were nominated, and that was something that was easy to implement right away, so we did.
All right, jumping us back into our questions. We're on question number 7 now, which is how do you demonstrate to the community that you've implemented things based on their feedback? Laura, you got something?
Yes, I do. So one thing we do once a month is a customer newsletter. So we feature individual customers at different properties or venues and companies, not only the individual but also products. So we'll say, you asked and we listened. Here's a list of things that we're going to, or that we've implemented, and then also we're doing product sort of like sneak peeks, so people can see what has changed from the previous iteration to the new iteration, and the changes are pretty dramatic. So at least customers know that something is coming down the pipeline. So that's one way that we can at least get as much of that into one email as possible. We don't get as granular to say, oh, this button here, you guys thought it was really distracting, so we removed it. We don't get that granular. So usually we'll go for the big updates that would affect the most customers all at once. But we'll do it through content usually.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Laura there. Again, we don't get too finite in what we've changed, but we make the sort of umbrella announcement, and usually we'll do it in a blog post, and some of our community see it there. And then for those who aren't checking our blog, we'll send them a weekly email update, for example. So that's, yeah, content is probably our main channel for that.
I actually do get pretty granular with it. Like I will, wait, is my mute on? Sorry. Oh, okay, cool, thanks. I'll get pretty like into the small details of it, like if somebody requests a certain article topic, like we had on COPD, somebody was asking for, well, a lot of people were asking for stem cell therapy, an article on that, and we were able to go to one of our medical writers and get one, but it took a few weeks, and so I just kept notes. This might sound crazy, but I kept notes of like who to go back to and let them know about the stem cell therapy article was out and linked it to it. So I don't know if that's like too basic, but that's one way we do it.
That's community management.
I think I touched into this before, and I'm sorry. Construction literally just started out my window. And now I wish I could go tell them. I'm like, I'm sorry, there's a hangout going on right now. Kidding.
It's all good. You can't really even hear it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Okay, right now it literally sounds like they're drilling next to me. But I kind of mentioned this earlier, but in our idea exchange, in that feature, there's an opportunity for people to turn, or product managers rather, to turn that idea from accepted to delivered. And then usually at that point they'll be like, hey, Brew, thank you so much for your, a feature for your idea. We delivered this in whatever release. So that communicates to that person that, hey, like, their idea is accepted.
So what about, can any of you share a story of a time community feedback has made a really big impact, either internally or to the community?
I'll go ahead and share. We had several features in beta, and so last year, I think it was around September, we released a feature in beta on our community, and then one thing that I really loved was that users started chiming in with their feedback, saying things like, hey, I really like this, or I like the way that this works, but I noticed this tiny little glitch. And that was an opportunity for our team to then take a look at that feedback and then implement, so that when we released the feature to everybody, it was a lot more improved based on the feedback that they had received. And for a lot of the users that I talked to, they felt really invested in the feature. They had this sense of accomplishment, like, hey, my suggestion made this feature better, or I made this suggestion and I see that in the feature now.
Yeah, we we're building all the time based on feedback. Big part of what we're trying to use our surveys and feedback and focus groups for right now is aspects of gamification elements, so thresholds for rewards and things like that, and that can be a really powerful tool if done right. So we're trying to get as much user feedback from heavy users, new users, and everywhere in between, just to see, sort of gauge what they feel is appropriate to sort of level up. So that's a big area where we're implementing feedback right now.
Yeah, I'd say some of the largest impacts that we've had come from more implicit feedback than explicit feedback. So, I can think of one feature in particular where we were so excited to have it launch, and we were like, this is going to change the world, because the world of online ticketing is really actually not going to change the world in any way. But we were very excited about it, and the implicit feedback that we got was people were just not into it. Like nobody clicked that button. They were like, it's like it didn't even exist. So while that wasn't direct feedback, it certainly helped us realize that like how we use our system isn't necessarily how our average user uses it. So obviously we are super users of our own systems, or I hope we all are. And the things that we want aren't necessarily the things that most of our community members and customers want. It's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but it's a good lesson.
Sarah, you made a good point about kind of that, like, direct feedback, and then but I also, even not indirect, but through listening, sometimes you can find feedback, right? And specifically, I was thinking for us with kind of this communities built around restaurants or different foods. We'll leverage just listening about people's general feedback to better improve the product. Or in some cases, it's pretty interesting. We'll find that maybe a part of the country wasn't trained correctly to prepare that new dish, and hey, the cheese is runny, and we're finding that runny cheese is all central around this area and can go in and fix that experience for the end user. And so I think sometimes we think about feedback as something we're asking for or we're getting directly, but I think one of the beautiful things about social is we can also just sort of go out there and listen, and try to find people talking to each other or just straight up complaining, about different things. So.
Yeah, I agree. I would say social is a good listening tool, but we also look in the back end, kind of like what Sarah was saying, is that it's a lot of implicit feedback, and we have a whole team that is dedicated to looking at our software's usage. So if people aren't using our product, we really want to know why, because they probably paid, a fair amount of money to use it. So, it's not necessarily feedback in, how to improve the product, but sometimes it comes down to training. It's not that somebody thinks the product sucks and that's why they're not using it. It might be because they just don't know how to. So understanding, again, with feedback, kind of understanding, well, why aren't they using it? Is it because it's too hard to use? Do we need to improve the user interface? Or is it because they just simply need training and have no idea where to go? So understanding, kind of understanding that implicit feedback and why it is. And yes, I'm all for cheese, runny cheese.
Laura, I'm interested in hearing more. Like, if it's just a training issue, how do you address that quickly? Like, do you put out sort of help center articles or a video, or how do you deal with that?
Great question. So I work very closely with our customer success team, and one of their health metrics is so each person on the customer success team has a set number of accounts that they manage, and their sole job is to make sure that people are up and running and trained. So we can actually run the numbers. We use Salesforce to see what that user's usage is of the software. So if we run the numbers and we look at maybe the bottom 10% of any one person's set of accounts, how are they doing? Do we need to get them up 10% because that's the team goal? Well, they got to figure out, well, how do we do that? So it's very easy for us to figure out who's not really using it, and then they just contact them and say, hey, how's it going? And then, that's when sometimes they'll come back and say, hey, I have feedback on the software. And then maybe it's just a matter of managing, again, the expectation that, oh, that's not a bug. This is where you go to do that. So we run reports all the time, so we have a whole team dedicated to that. But when it comes to feedback, that's something that I glean, and I work cross-functionally with other teams to get some of that feedback.
Well, we will have a little bit of time if you're watching us and hanging out over on Twitter. So if you have a question for the panel, please feel free to tweet us, and we'll bring that in. We're gonna roll on to our kind of last planned question here, which is just about tips. So what tips do you have on implementing feedback for your community? Anything that's sort of kind of hindsight 2020, wish you would have done in the past? Any pro tips?
I can start on this one. My favorite example of gathering feedback ever is American Idol. I think it's brilliant, even though it's outdated now, but like they are gathering feedback through the entire process of creating a recording artist, right? So, and they're monetizing it on like both ends before they've created an album after. It's amazing. So when I am trying to get feedback, I try and set things up in an American Idol style. If that makes sense. That's my biggest tip.
For us, we came up with, well, we didn't come up with it, but I heard about it that NASA uses this, and I figured if it's good enough for NASA, maybe it's good enough for a health union. But basically, we bucket things into 4 different buckets, and so it'll be like, we call it, I think NASA calls it G1, G2, G3. We made it 4 because we're more complicated than NASA apparently, but basically we just call it HU1, HU2, 3, 4, and if it's something that is something that we as the community team can do on our own, and it's kind of like an easy fix, then we will put it in HU1 and we can do it right away and like talk about it at our next community meeting, make it an action item and do it. If it's HU2, I won't go through all of them, but it's like if we need the UX team or if we need other teams to get involved, or I think actually our contributors and moderators are for level 2. But you get what I'm saying. It's like gradually, like the more people we need and the less it's just under our control. Or I should have said that the reverse. If we can do it ourselves, like we can get it done faster. And that kind of gives us a nice way to strategize and a timeline for it. So I find that helpful. So I figured I'd share.
I think one tip I have for community managers implementing feedback is if there's feedback that ties into specifically like an initiative or a project or a promotion, whatever it is that you're working on, and you tie that in, go ahead and share that win with your manager, with your team, because I say this a lot, you know, the more community feedback and things from users, metrics, things like that, that you can tie in together and package that for your team, for your manager, for whoever you're sharing your wins with, that's a huge accomplishment. And you can then show them the value of the community, saying, hey, like, for example, you know, with that feature story that I mentioned earlier, we wouldn't have been able to implement this feature as it is today without all that community feedback.
Yeah, I just add to that. Totally agree, and just always be listening. Just entrench yourself in the community, be a part of it, and like interact with people. Don't just take the company stance and sort of sit back and watch everything happen. Actually be part of the action and be the advocate for your community. Take that back to your team and make changes where necessary.
Another tip that I think is important, and I'm surprised that we've been talking about feedback for 45 minutes, and like nobody's mentioned the 80-20 rule. So, you know, like that's my tip. Just, I think at this point I like butcher that rule, but I just think of like 80-20. Okay, is it going to like improve 80% of whatever for 20% of the work, or like whatever the two 80-20 things are, and then I'm like, is that even what the rule is? I don't even know, but it's an important one and you can use it to your advantage. Also, if you can tie feedback into obviously revenue. So if you can say like, I've heard enough community members give feedback on this that I think like here's the case for, you know, we could be getting this much more traction or getting this many more people as paid users, that's like, go for it. You know, like nobody's going to say no to that. So that's another great tip.
I would say one other really good tip is to always be transparent. So if a lot of people are requesting a feature or a big change, and it's just not super high on your priority list, is to just maintain the expectation that we hear you, but it's not going to happen. So that's definitely one tip there too. Be transparent.
I have some questions then maybe. Like for that example, like if you're getting a lot of feedback from your community members and customers that are sometimes the same but sometimes not, and they're asking for things that are just not on your roadmap at all, at what point do you say, are we going in the wrong direction? Like, is our demographic, like our target market, like maybe not what we think it is? Or how do you decide on that?
Wait, could you repeat that? My internet's cutting out.
Oh, sorry. And that was
Or
really a question.
Put it in the chat.
A question for everyone.
Okay.
How do you decide on if you're getting a lot of customer and community feedback on, let's say, we really want this feature, but it isn't in your roadmap at all? When do you decide that, like, maybe how you view your customers and how they actually are different, and maybe you do need to, not restart entirely, like you don't have to pivot your entire business, but like say, okay, let's stop a minute here and say, like, maybe we do need to take a little diversion and make that happen?
I mean, I think it depends on also if it's becoming critical mass, if it is something that is tied to revenue. Like, for example, there is just such a big bug on your site that people are just so dissatisfied with their product that it's turning people away, and it's making it harder for account managers to renew those customers, and it becomes a revenue thing. I think as a company, you need to take a look at, well, what do you value? Is that new product that you're super jazzed about that will maybe solve some of these problems over here, but now we have this other big problem here. So I think as a company, and depending on what kind of resources you have, the company needs to figure out, okay, well, what do we do? Do we need to hire more people that can work on problem A and problem B to make both camps happy? So I think that's actually definitely a bigger discussion with the company and all the people involved, because sort of like what Jen was saying earlier is that is there something that we can change? Cool, then we'll just go ahead and do it because it's quicker for us to do it. But if it's something where it's going to take developer hours and it's going to need a whole brand new team, I mean, as a company, you need to figure out what's more important.
I'd love to hear more about people's specific processes for implementing feedback, if you guys want to talk about that.
I love using Trello. I'm sure, I'll just say that, and I'm sure maybe other people use it as well. I don't know.
Cool.
So one thing we do use is the ideas portion of Lithium's technology, because our forums are on Lithium. And what we use them for is actually not for product ideas, but for community ideas. So what people are able to do is suggest different things to improve the actual community platform. For example, even there were a handful of people who wanted a board specifically for community members in India because they have a few different challenges around using Magento that may not exist in other countries, and that way they could have their area to talk about it. So what we did in that case was I did mark it as acknowledged and then asked them to really show that enough people are interested in it so that if we provided this space, it wouldn't look like a ghost town or an empty board. It would have plenty of discussion. And so it was cool to kind of rally members that use Magento in India and show that there was plenty of interest there. So then from there we were able to mark it as implemented once we did.
I want to acknowledge real quick over on Twitter, Sarah had the question about what tools do you use to track feedback or measure usage. So I think the earlier question was about process, but I think it's interesting to discuss both process, measuring, and usage, and kind of the tools. And I know you said Trello as one of those options. What else is out there?
I touched on this briefly, but just to go into a little bit more detail for Sarah, the idea exchange that I have, it includes two features that I really like. In addition to the status, one is kudos, so you can see how many people have kudoed that idea. In other words, how many people also want that feature. And then secondly, the comments. And those really help us understand, why people want this, how it'll help their business, or how it'll drive change or revenue for them. So that's one tool that we use. And in previous communities that I ran where we didn't have this kind of process, we would use Jira. And I think the important thing here is to start bucketing feedback. You don't want, the same piece of feedback for the same feature, for example, like in 5 different places. You want it all in one place where you can point to that to a larger team and say, hey, 213 people are asking for this feature. So basically having a tool like that where you can track and measure how many people want it and how many people it impacts.
Yeah, there's several out there. We also use Lithium's right now because that's our platform, but I know User Voice is also a great place for collecting user feedback and allowing people to upvote and comment. And I believe you can do that with Zendesk software as well if you're using Zendesk. For customer support, both of those handle ideas pretty well.
All right. Well, boy, everyone's been so concise here. We've blown through 9 questions, some spin-off questions, and some Twitter questions. Well, how about you guys here hanging out? Is there anything you'd like to ask each other as we have a little bit of time left?
We have a question actually that just came in from Rachel Medanik on Twitter.
Well,
my apologies if I said that incorrectly.
Let me bring it up real quick here. All right, Rachel. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, Rachel. Rachel asks, would love to hear the panel talk about the closing the loop on community feedback, even if it takes a year to do. So let's talk about closing the loop.
We don't close the loop. We keep it going. But do you mean, I guess to get a little bit more specific, and maybe I'll tweet her in a second, close the loop on like a specific feature that was implemented that a person requested, or
yeah, that's the way I definitely read it is, like a specific piece of feedback. How do you close the loop on a specific piece? And I'd be interested to hear what you mean by Laura, by we don't close the loop.
Yeah, so we want to constantly engage with people who have given us feedback. So making sure that if they gave us feedback in Q1, that we're still reaching out in Q2, 3, and 4 to make sure that they know that it's still open. You can still continue to give us feedback. Very often we'll hear from people. Sometimes we'll do a call for product testers, for example, and it's just we'll pair them up with a product manager for the product that they use the most. Sometimes people come and do that one time, and then we just never hear from them ever again. And is it because they just got really busy, or is it because we're not engaging with them? 9 times out of 10, it's because we got what we needed, and they just got really busy, and then that was it. So we're working really hard to make sure that we're always engaging them. Is it via a couple of really, really short check-in emails to say, hey, how's it going? Thanks for that feedback. By the way, we're going to be looking for testers again if you're interested. So making sure that loop is always going, not just, this person gave us feedback one time and then that was it.
Yeah. I've always wanted to, how there's always that one person that's like, I want this feature so bad, I want this feature so bad, come on guys, just do it. And I've always wanted to be in the situation where they just wear you down and finally you build that feature for them and then name it after them. I haven't done it yet, but if anyone does do that, I think it would be great. I'm trying to think of a situation where I could get a feature named after me. The Sarah feature, that would be awesome. I hope it's a good feature, but yeah, that would be amazing. In real life, though, I think circling back, definitely if you're using Trello or Jira or Lithium or Zendesk as well, you can go back and see how many people have requested that feature and see all of their contact information. And it does feel really good, even if it's been, whether it's a week or a full year, to email that person and say hey, I know it's been a year, but we've finally implemented this thing that you want. Are you are you still using us? Hopefully, yeah, and check it out and let us know what you think.
I think the important takeaway here is that, make sure that you close the loop, whether it's on responding to that feature or communicating about it, making sure that you communicate to that user. So whether it's a feature that you're able to deliver or not, you want to make sure that they're going to feel free to submit feedback later on, to whether it's about that specific feature or just in your community, to continue to take in feedback and not shut things down completely.
All right, and I brought it on screen, but Rachel did kind of clarify. She just said close the loop, meaning tell them you will or won't do it, and then when you do implement it, how do you give props and do it? And I think we covered that. So, all right, 2 more minutes if anyone has any closing thoughts. Anything you're just burning to get out?
Apparently, we really love cheese and
since you wanted to know.
What was that, Sherry? Your internet glitched.
Who, me?
Yeah. So we only heard
Oh,
a
I
second
just
of
said
you.
Sarah Lang wanted to know what our hidden talents are, so I was asking her what her hidden talent is.
No, I don't have any at all.
A hidden talent.
I have a hidden talent.
I can actually move my left ear without the rest of my face moving, but I don't think it's useful for anything.
Oh yeah.
I
see it.
see it.
Now you've put me on the spot. I don't know that you can catch it with the internet
Now
stuff,
she's all
but if you
nerd.
see me in person, I will do it.
Like 16.
I can touch my nose with my tongue, but that's just weird.
I have
eat a lot.
a quick question for you guys. Are any of you setting up community meetups in person, or is most of your community management done online?
Yes, but our community organizes said meetups, actually. They're organized by them, not by us.
We do. Obviously, I work for an events platform, so we also create events, and we do everything from we've had a pickling event, we've had morning dance parties, we've had let's go out and drink and get to know each other events, but it's just, yeah, I see the question, pickling. Yes, somebody on our team is an expert pickler of vegetables, and we threw an event and he taught everyone else how to pickle vegetables. So it was great, actually, and delicious. The fruits of the event were yummy. So anyway, those are all the types of events that we do. It's so great meeting people from around the world online and getting to know them. And for a long time, I had to talk about my internet friends, and people that in real life would be like, but now it's totally normal, right? So that part is great, but there's also something about like knowing somebody online for like 7 years, I think is the longest I've known someone online, and then meeting them face to face in person, and like them so well, the first thing you want to do is give them a hug, and that's the best feeling. So I'm all about having real life events with your community.
All right, guys. Well, that brings us to the end of the Hangout today. But thank you. This has been awesome. Very insightful. We'll absolutely have a recap of it online. And until next week, have a great week, and we'll see you in February. Bye.
Bye.